And now, a show with inappropriate language. The Powell Movement.
Welcome to the Powell Movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and this week I'm recovering from an amazing Christmas, and I hope you and yours had a very merry one. Actually, if you listen to the show enough, you know that I've recorded this intro before Christmas. I usually record on Tuesday or Wednesday, so Christmas hasn't happened yet, but it's going to be an awesome one. How do I know this? Well, we went the extra mile this year. For my wife and I, we know what we are getting. Why? My wife doesn't like surprises and likes to buy her own gifts. That took a little while to get used to on my end, but whatever. For the two of us, we got a new 58-inch TV, so we are stoked. But the goal this year was to make sure our kid has an amazing Christmas, since this year has been such a shit show and bummer for him. And what he wants is an Xbox Series X, and they are so hard to get in traditional methods. I mean, I went to a few GameStops on Black Friday at 3 a.m. and I had no luck. There were tons of people already waiting, and each store only had 5 units, so I was pretty much screwed there. I sat waiting online for various retail websites to put them on sale, just to find out that I was shit out of luck in seconds. They sold out so quick. I went to a friend that works at Xbox, and while he gave me some money can't buy stuff, he still couldn't get me in line to pay full price for an Xbox Series X. We were screwed, and it was looking like it was going to be a disappointing Christmas. And then we did something that goes against everything that I stand for. We paid more than retail for this gift. While I am notoriously tight with money, my wife and I talked about it and we were like, fuck it. We pulled the trigger. And we feel really good about it. In the long run, we're fortunate that that money is not going to make us or break us, but it really will tie all of Christmas together. But aside from Christmas, all of this makes me think of how great the marketing and go-to-market strategy of both Xbox and PlayStation were. In skiing and snowboarding, marketers don't know how to launch anything other than have athletes post about it when a new product is released. The last time I remember a real demand for a product in ski and snowboard, it was for the Rossignol S7 skis, the ones with those honeycomb tips that it seemed like everyone had a few years back. There was also demand for a Salomon touring binding a couple years back, but there hasn't been any new great innovations that people are really dying to get their hands on. I mean, you can look at the new K2 snowboard. That's one that looks identical to the Rossi S7, but in a snowboard fashion. And I wonder if that one will crush it like the skis did. Will snowboarders see that technology and want to buy it up like skiers? Who knows? I mean, it seems like in this world of similar specs, flexes, and price points, you can totally turn a brand around in a few flagship models. And the landscape of the industry? Well, it's changing. It has heritage brands like Elan competing against dudes like Jason Leventhal, or the handful of pro athlete, marketer, and even retail collaborations that are starting to pop up. The game keeps changing, and it's exciting for some and scary for others. I would think it's really scary for the athletes of today. It's all about proving your value. And if you've been pro for a while, have a good following, and have projects that you're working on, you should be fine. But not everyone has that rich history. My guest this week is in an interesting position. Caite Zeliff was named Queen of Corbetts 2 years in a row, which led to contracts and instant ski fame. But now we're in a pandemic, and she's coming off a late season injury, and this will be a big season for her. And while I don't want to spoil any of this for you, Caite's story is a little bit different than most skiers I have on the podcast, and it is a really great listen. Before we get into it, I want to ask you to do a few things for me. First, follow me on Instagram at The Powell Movement. I'm still trying to get to that 10,000 follower mark, so if you are not following me, please do so. You can also message me there with any feedback, or you can email me at mike@thepowellmovement.com, and I will get back to you. I also want to ask you to subscribe and rate the podcast wherever you listen to it. And finally, I want to ask you to support my amazing sponsors who make this thing happen. They are Cole Headwear, Stanley, Elon Skis, the 10 Barrel Brewery, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, and Glade Optics. Now, let's talk to Caite Zeliff. We are full on in the world of COVID, and it's Thanksgiving week. What are your Thanksgiving plans?
God, it keeps changing. I had plans of going down south. I've recently gotten into paragliding, and there's some opportunities in San Diego that I was going to go track down for Thanksgiving and just go rogue, but I decided to cancel that. So currently in Salt Lake, and I'm deciding if I want to hang out here, go back to Jackson and dive in. So your guess is as good as mine on that one.
And Salt Lake, that is like a hub for the virus, I feel like, or at least it was a few weeks ago. Is it like 50-50 when you look outside and see people like half wearing masks and half not?
I'm hiding in a cute little spot right at the base of the canyon, so I'm a little bit removed from most people, but yeah, it's just kind of crazy. I feel like the media makes it like super hysteria driven, and you like show up to a place expecting it to be super nasty, and it's honestly like business as usual so far, but I'm being as conscientious as possible and traveling around in my own vehicle, which is always a nice way to go about things. And yeah, I don't know, all things considered, it seems pretty normal, but maybe I'm in the wrong spot.
Yeah. Well, you being a pro skier coming off an injury, I would think it's a scary time as brands really don't know what's going to happen totally. And is there any fear on your end of losing sponsorships or having them restructured or just having to worry about the virus and how that impacts your bottom line?
There's definitely conversations being had as far as like, hey guys, obviously, as every company, we're going through some struggles and unknowns, but every company that I ski for has been really good about taking care of the athletes that they've had on board. And I feel super secure with all the current relationships. I don't think it's the best time to ask for more money or go for a bigger contract or maybe even reach out to new brands, but I feel pretty secure. The companies I ski for have done a really good job of making me feel really comfortable in my place and that I'm not going to get the rug just ripped out from under me, which is then just a huge relief. I know that's not been the case across the board. So I'm personally feeling really lucky to be supported by these brands and for them to take care of the athletes that they currently have on their roster.
Yeah, it sounds like you're in a good spot. And I think for all athletes, it's more important than ever to show your value to the brands and to show how you can make an impact on their marketing and stay relevant. And have you thought about that with your plans for the season of how you're going to be out there?
Definitely. It was kind of a big shift, like just trying to feel it out as far as how I can be productive and also be socially responsible. It's a tricky one for these big companies that end up funding all of my travel, and basically they have to be responsible at the end of the day with their spending as well. So I went out and I bought a snowmobile, and I'm going to just be as productive as possible in my backyard. And I'm lucky to have a pretty kick-ass backyard being in Jackson, Wyoming. I have a lot of places I can go explore and still be safe, but I've definitely been conscientious of being able to be available for whatever Zoom meetings any company has going on, or if there's like an opera, all women's with Technica Blizzard, they like to do women to women, like, I don't know, ski boot chats and these classic like Zoom happy hours. And I just try to make myself available for events that normally would be an in-person event and I would be stoked to go to. I try to just prioritize these online events in the same way, as well as trying to continuously create current content, even when it's a little trickier to get out with photographers. I feel like if I can just have constant content coming in and be available, I'm doing the best I can. And we're all just trying to be flexible too, like understanding that this is a new world we're navigating and just giving everyone the benefit of the doubt and kind of letting it work out as it will.
Yeah, I would think staying in Jackson and kind of keeping it a little bit looser than you have in years past, knowing that you can always take a hard right if you need to, is kind of the way to plan the season. But before you were in Jackson Hole, you were born in Jackson, New Hampshire, and you grew up in North Conway. And it's like a little ski community, but skiing wasn't part of your early childhood. What were you into in the pre-ski years?
God, I didn't really find sports until third grade or fourth grade. So just growing up, doing the thing, trying to navigate all those childhood things and making friends and learning how to socialize and figuring out like all those funny nuances. And then I really got into soccer. I've always been a huge fan of athletics. I was lucky enough to have a really athletic family, and so therefore the genes were kind of there, and it wasn't so much pressure to be involved in athletics. It was just something I was good at and enjoyed. So your classic sports, PE, whatever, just skiing was never at the forefront of my childhood until that school program when I was in third grade kind of introduced skiing to me, and from that point I guess the rest is history, and it just became an obsession from there.
Well, it sounds like from what I read that you grew up with a single mom. And is your dad in the picture at all when you were growing up?
He was not. There was a couple times in high school where I reached out, but it was just my mom and I. And I think that also lended itself to, I got my athletic abilities through him. So knowing that I had these athletic genes, but also my mom wasn't the most, she was kind of busy providing and having the jobs to put food on the table and never really showed any interest in the outdoor world in the same ways that a lot of people in my town did. So she raised me in a very beautiful way, but I think the outdoors and the athletics were something I always craved, and therefore have kind of put a lot of my time and energy in now that I have the choice to do so.
So is your mom just working all kinds of jobs, like you said, to put food on the table? And are you being raised by like solo time in TV, or is there other family around there to help bring you up?
It was definitely a lot of alone time. I think being an only child, you become really creative, and I would play whatever make-believe stuff in my world, which is also so funny to think about. I worry that kids don't have that creative aspect anymore of just like, I had like imaginary friends and like my worlds were just kind of very made up.
What were their names? Do you have imaginary friend names?
Well, they were like animals. I don't even remember if I remember their names. I was just like hanging out with them. And every day it was like, I kind of created these like little plays, I guess. So it was never like I had one imaginary friend homie. It was always like I would kind of like make up playing house or being on a safari or whatever it was. And those were constantly changing. But yeah, I mean, wake up in the morning, I was throw like a toaster strudel in the toaster, get myself ready, catch the bus. It was definitely a lot of solo time, which I think led to just me being a very like independent person.
Yeah, and like you said, skiing starts for you in third grade. Your town has some program that started back in the early 1900s where like they take you to Cranmore Mountain, which is right down the street from your house. And when you go ski for the first time, are you hooked right away? Is it something where you're like looking at the mountain your whole life and then when you finally get to do it, you're like, I love this?
I think so. Yeah. I wish I could remember that exact moment, but I do remember just like that ultimate freedom that we all feel every fall when we throw our skis back on of just being able to go really fast. Other than riding a motorcycle or a couple of other things, I feel like skiing is the most like unprotected way of enjoying the outdoors, going fast and being able to choose your line and just play around. And yeah, it was a very small hill. It wasn't anything super aggressive, but I definitely remember being like, that was the most fun I've potentially ever had and just wanting to go back and get more every week.
So I just took away there that you love having unprotected fun and you want to have more every week, which is crazy. But you get hooked right away with skiing, and then a family friend or a friend gets you into racing, which I'm sure your mom's like, thank you, this is very expensive, and you're getting my kid into it. Yeah, you get into the most expensive thing you can do in the ski world, ski racing. Is that something that you take to right away as well?
Yeah, to be completely honest, I feel like that was the first time I was really good at something and I won an award for something. And I really enjoyed the going fast aspect and I really enjoyed the challenge. But there is something to be said. I think like maybe it was the absentee dad thing or single mom and whatever it was. But it felt really good to have so many people like applaud me and congratulate me, as weird as that sounds now, because I really try to get away from the ego and all those aspects. But in that moment, I was like, whoa, like I'm good at this and people recognize me for this and I'm getting attention for this. And as a little girl, I think that was like one of the biggest draws. And just to know, I feel like ski racing is so beautiful because it's cut and dry. If you win, you're the fastest. And so therefore I knew I was good at it. It wasn't people thinking I was good. It was on paper that I was the fastest. And so therefore I started getting more attached to the idea of getting better and fine tuning. And I really like those type of activities where you can see progress and you can be in it and kind of day to day, week to week, really see yourself progress. So I think I got attached to all aspects of that world.
I mean, I never really thought of it like this, but like I look at my kid and my wife and I are always telling him how great he's doing at things and he gets a lot of positive feedback. You don't have a dad, so you don't get 50% of that positive feedback. Then your mom's working so much that you're missing out on so much that, yeah, everybody telling you how great you are has got to like give you self-confidence for the first time other than when you're with your mom. Like you can go out around your friends and like, I can do this. Like I'm pretty badass.
Yeah, and it feels good outside the family too. Like my mom was incredibly supportive, but it's something special to have a peer or someone you admire or whoever to tell you that, wow, good job. You know, for some reason, as much as we all love our parents, it feels good to have an outsider prop you up instead of them because you're like, it doesn't count. You're my mom. That's unconditional. But yeah, no, there was definitely a lot to do with that aspect of just having the community kind of come around me too and help support me. And there was, like you said, it's an expensive sport. So I was lucky enough to, have fundraisers put together just to help when I was really charging and trying to get on the US ski team and go to these boarding schools. And luckily there's a ton of financial aid, which is incredibly helpful. But the community has always been really amazing at backing me up and helping me and my mom like get the funds necessary. And the whole Mount Washington Valley is good across the board. Like we're always going to fundraisers when I was back home for whoever that was trying to achieve some goal. And that sense of community was really strong.
Back then, you need more than what you can get just at Cranmore. While you're doing well race-wise, you realize the only way out and to get to your goal of the U.S. ski team, because I would think, while some kids want to be an astronaut, you've probably set your goal as a U.S. ski teamer, and your way to get there isn't going to be through some public school. It's going to be going to one of those badass ski academies that your mom can't afford, you can't afford, because they're $60,000 a year if you're going to go and live there, and that's kind of what it's going to take. And are you one of those go-getters by nature who's like, I'm going to figure out a way to get myself into one of these schools, and you study really hard and you get yourself a scholarship? Is that how it all comes together for you?
Oh yeah, to like a neurotic level of obsession. It's crazy because I feel like I'm starting to learn about balance, but when I was younger, if I had a goal, like that's all I thought about. And I think that's the beauty of being whatever, a middle schooler, high schooler. You don't have to worry about paying car payments or rent or whatever it is. Your main focus is school and athletics and a few other things. But I definitely, that was all I could think about, all I focused on. And I do think that that's where a lot of my success came from, was just like being uninterrupted in this quest. And I actually, it's funny you bring up the astronaut thing, because I went home to my childhood home like 5 years ago maybe, and I saw on the door of the bedroom that I grew up in, I had written on the side, I'm going to be on the US ski team. And I've always been like pretty into the law of attraction and things of that nature. My grandmother was a Buddhist and kind of instilled the idea of like thoughts become things. And it was just this goal that I had all the time on my mind. And I definitely was like slept on skiing, like dreamed about skiing. When I was in class, I was doodling race courses. Like the level of obsession was high, but I do feel like I'm very grateful for that, because otherwise I wouldn't maybe be in the shoes that I'm currently in.
Yeah, and what's so cool about this all to me is, first, your mom could have ended up feeling like shit for everything because she couldn't send you to Proctor or some kind of academy, because it's just not in her means to be able to do that, to send you to a rich person's school. But she doesn't have to carry that guilt at all because you're so badass and you're so motivated and obsessed, like you said. What are the kinds of things that you needed to do to get yourself considered for a scholarship? Because we're talking about over 4 years, it's like $300,000 to go to these schools. It's crazy.
It's an insane amount of money. And it really was like, I was lucky to have other sports. Like I was 4-year varsity soccer all the time I was there, and I was always in AP classes or honors classes. And so I was lucky to just pull my weight in all the necessary places. And it was also too like getting your foot in the door in one of those schools and kind of proving yourself and skiing fast and good grades and the things that you need to do to get in there. And then once I was in there, it was just kind of constantly proving that I was deserving of being there. You know, when they are paying your $50,000-$60,000 tuition, it's important to show up for class, not be late, kind of just be an all around good ambassador for the school, because that's what you are. You know, it's just like sponsors now. It's the same idea. They're kind of paying your way because they feel as if you're going to bring something to the school. So I was constantly running for student office positions, and I was super neurotic about school. I was really adamant about going and getting a proper private school education of like college level, because I thought that that was also a ticket to the US ski team. Like if the US ski team didn't happen immediately, like I go to Dartmouth or I go to one of these schools and then I get fed onto the team that way. And so it was kind of, even at whatever, 15, I had this backup plan, and school was a part of it. And I would say, looking back, I almost wish I gave myself more of a break, because I was like pulling all-nighters and working so hard and stressed out. And high school's weird anyway, right? But I don't think I like enjoyed it as much as I could have, because I was so driven. But, you know, I think all those building blocks were really important, and I wouldn't change a thing.
So you were so driven that they decided to move you into your headmaster's house. What is that all about?
Well, I was also a bit naughty. I feel like I was good at working really hard, and then I just needed to like blow off steam. So the headmaster basically saved my ass is what it comes down to. I got in trouble. I was sneaking out, and we'd go on trips to South America and France and these places where the drinking age was 16 or lower, and I was 16 at that point. And I felt like I was like skiing so hard and was working so hard. And then I also have always loved people and culture and was so excited to be in these worlds. But when you go and travel with a team, you're not really taking on the culture, and you're not learning about the environment that you're in. It's more like you wake up, you go train, you go home. Like you could have been in the US, you could have been in France, you don't know. So I think part of me was like rebelling against how hard I was being pressured internally and externally, and just wanted to go like explore these beautiful places. So basically I had two strikes against me, and the headmaster grabbed me and was like, hey, we believe in you. He had a family at the time. His son was a year older. His daughter was a couple of years younger. He's like, we believe in you. We don't want to see you get kicked out, basically was where I was at. And him and his wife took me in, and it was actually really beautiful. I think for a minute there, I was like, well, great. I'm in even more of a prison than I was before. Like private school is kind of no joke. You would take your license plate off your car, and you had to give it in. And you had to get like all this paperwork signed out to leave. But I think looking back on it, moving into Mike and Betsy's house was one of the biggest saving graces of, I don't know, they taught me more than I would have learned if I was just in a dorm scenario. And they kind of gave me purpose in ways that I didn't realize I was really throwing away all these opportunities by partying, and they really put it into perspective. And they're people I still stay in touch with now. They're very much like family. So that was a beautiful blessing.
So they help you get through school, and you end up finishing, and the goal is to get to the US ski team. you haven't done that in high school. A lot of people will get to a developmental team in high school and then move their way up. So you go to another year at Stratton. So a post-grad year, I think at Stratton Mountain School is my guess. And is the focus just on making the U.S. ski team, or do you need another year to get through high school?
It was solely like skiing focused. I did have an opportunity my junior year to go, and I tried out for the U.S. ski team. I had been skiing with the speed team on and off for a year, and they were kind of just resurfacing the whole team. And they called up, I think, 7 or 8 women to go and try out. And I was skiing so fast, and I was like so fired up. But then we had interviews, and we had like this workout thing, and I had never like Proctor is very much a preparatory school. It's not a ski academy. So we would be in the gym for sure, but it wasn't in the same ways that these girls that I was skiing against had been in the gym. And basically I got all worked up in my head about a couple of the aspects of the training or the mind game. Like they did sports psychology, and there was a couple of things I just wasn't prepared for. And long story short, they basically told me that I wasn't mature enough at this point to be on the team. And that was, as you can imagine, one of the biggest heartbreaks that I had experienced up until that point in my life. And was just like wrecked about it. And then in hindsight, it was the best thing that's ever happened to me. But basically, I kind of recovered from that stab and was like, oh man, like, do I still want this? And my PG year at Stratton was kind of me figuring out, is this really what I want? And taking one last year to take inventory on it all. And what I came to realize is that I was ready to just go and ski collegiately. Like going to ski D1, at least in my opinion, was a break from the chase of the U.S. ski team, and it seemed like I needed more. I like learning, and I enjoy socializing with different people, and I was in a small ski bubble, and it was great, but I just felt like I wanted more, and I saw what the ski team had to offer, and it wasn't necessarily, I feel like all of my dreams I just romanticize, and then you get there and you're like, wow, this isn't necessarily what I was after anyway. So the PG year was definitely a place of discovery and deciding what really I wanted my future to hold. And I, at that point, wasn't skiing as fast as I needed to be anyway. So it was between that and then just deciding I didn't want to take another PG year. I didn't have that in me, and just decided it was time to maybe go and ski D1 and be perfectly happy with that.
Now it's time for me to take a sponsor break. And my first sponsor is the 10 Barrel Brewery out of Bend, Oregon. If you haven't noticed, 10 Barrel supports so much in the world of ski, snowboard, and bike. But another cool thing about 10 Barrel is that they also do so much out-of-the-box fun shit, like giving away old Army vehicles filled with beer and so much more. I could go on and on about the antics, the Pray for Snow Winter Ale, and the Profuse Juice Hazy IPA that I've been drinking a ton of, or how they give back to protect our winners and support so many important athletes and causes, but I don't have enough time. To find out more, head on over to 10barrel.com and you'll get all that info, and next time you're at the store, pick up a 6-pack of 10 Barrel. My next sponsor is Glade Optics. Headquartered in Colorado, they are the independent choice for goggles. Did you know that 9 out of 10 of the top brands in the goggle category are owned by parent companies? They are out to take your money and give it back to shareholders. Not Glade. Their goggles have the fit, function, and lens of a $300 corporate goggle without the big price tag. To me, they check the most important boxes. They look really good, and I tried them on a few different helmets, and they don't fog. From photochromatic lenses to magnetic interchange systems to storm lenses, it's definitely worth checking out Glade. It all comes at pricing that you aren't going to believe, and I'm going to get you 10% off that pricing. What you need to do is head on over to shopglade.com, pick out some goggles, and enter the code TPM10. That's all one word, all caps, and the number 10 to get that deal. My final sponsor in this break is Stanley. And they pretty much invented the category of containers that keep things hot and cold. And there is no other product on the market that comes close to doing this as well as what Stanley does. If you've owned a Stanley, you still have it and know exactly what I'm talking about. And this year, if you're a skier or a snowboarder and you're going to do the mountain right, you're going to have soups, coffee, hot chocolate, and you're going to keep that all in the car. And most likely, you don't have all the containers you're going to need to keep that stuff hot or cold. The good thing is I'm going to make it easier than ever for you to save 30% when you're buying the amazing products from Stanley. And all you need to do is to head on over to stanley-pmi.com, go shopping, enter the code drinkfast, that's all one word, all lowercase at checkout, and you'll get the deal and save 30%. Those are my sponsors. Now it's time to jump back into the podcast. When you're trying to make the U.S. team, you're racing to be the best in the world. And that's really, really exciting. But when you go to ski race in college, you're racing to be the best in college and win a national championship. Is there the same excitement there, or is it just the next step of what you can do?
I think it's exciting to represent a college. I think it was cool to be part of a team, and you really do have that camaraderie, as well as like, I mean, it made you so much cooler to be on a sports team in college, which I didn't realize until I was there. And I was like, oh yeah, people think that if you're on a team, you're like a goddess. So there was the same excitement. Unfortunately, I blew my knee out like in January. So it was a quick lived, like I got all the fall hype of training and saw the excitement there. And then I skied one carnival and was done for. So basically I saw it quick, and it was perfect though, like after I blew my knee out, it was like such a relieving place. I was so excited just to have a break from this thing. Like the ski racing has become like this monster, this thing that like had afforded me all of my education. It was giving me this opportunity to go to a college that I might not have been able to afford, or I would have had to get a ton of loans out. And then all of a sudden I just get a break from it. And I was really able in that moment to take inventory, because I feel like for a long time, there was just no getting away from it. It was everything. It's who I was. It was my identity. It was the people I knew. It was, I wouldn't go home and people wouldn't be like, how are you? They'd be like, how you skiing? Like I was able to disconnect and really take a good look on what I wanted and who I was. And that's what that injury created. And it helped me pivot to where I am in the freeride world. So I'm pretty grateful for that injury, which always sounds strange, but it really was such a game changer.
I can also see it being mentally weird where when you see the people that are always asking you how your racing's going and you tell them that you're hurt and racing's over, it's like they almost feel sad for you. Although it might be a blessing to yourself, where skiing at one point became a job to you. It paid for school. It did a whole bunch of stuff. But the hobby and the love probably wasn't as much as it was at one point in your life. But it's just weird that, yeah, the identity kind of disappears. Like you're defined as a ski racer, and now that's gone. Does it take a while to come to grips with that?
Definitely. I felt as if I wouldn't have the same, like, remember how I was talking about the first time I was applauded by people was in ski racing. So I feel like I was kind of conditioned my whole life to be like, people like you because you're fast. And I know that's not true, but that's kind of like the building blocks of how I learned. And I was worried that if I wasn't a ski racer, would people want to hang out with me? And it's a ridiculous statement to even make. But at that time, it was a real concern. It was like, that's all I knew. And yeah, it was relieving in my own head to be able to take a break, because the pressures were just so big and daunting and mostly put on myself. And I've always been that way. And I've come to the realization that my internal pressures don't necessarily represent the real pressures that are out there. But I think people were like, oh man, that sucks. I'm so sorry. And I was like, it's actually like really nice to just take a break. And unless you're in it, it's hard to explain that.
No, I can totally see it though, because yeah, it's like people feel sad for you because you weren't able to achieve your goal. And you know what? Your goal is something that a lot of people have. Less than 1% of people are able to achieve it. So that's just kind of what that deal is. And you were pretty damn close. But you get yourself fixed, and by the time fall 2014 rolls around, I think you're healthy, and I think this is around the time that you plan to pack your shit up and just head out west. And I don't know if it's a trip to Jackson Hole first, or if you're just going to be like a vagabond and go town to town until you find the spot. What's the actual road trip for you?
It was kind of a wild experience. I feel like I was still coming off of this, like, who am I post-college ski racer for life deal. And I had heard about the West Coast, and at that point, I think I probably had Instagram. So I was following whatever kids that I admired that were either on the U.S. ski team living out west, or I had met through whatever college ski racing friends from North Conway that had moved out west. And there was always so much color in their lives. And I had this idea of what the West Coast would offer. And being like a young woman, I felt like it was going to be like just a time to figure out who I was. And I basically drove directly west. I had stopped in Montana briefly to catch up with some friends that had just graduated from UNH. And then I went and I actually met a boy at a Dave Matthews concert at the Gorge in Washington.
So cheesy.
So cheesy. It's terrible. But we ended up dating for 5 years. So that was kind of a crazy introduction to that world. But I basically met him and then was going down the coast of California. And I spent a lot of time on Route 1. That was just a beautiful, I had never really spent time in any ocean except for Maine, and Maine's cold and rocky and gnarly. And so I was enjoying just being in surf culture. I got to go to San Francisco for the first time. I've always really admired rock stars and Janis Joplin. I just find that to be a fascinating world. But then I was cruising and kind of wasn't sure where I wanted to go. And I had a couple buddies talking about Jackson, Wyoming. And I was lucky enough to have a hometown connection there who she's now a very good friend of mine, but she ran a restaurant and I had a job there lined up. So I basically just took 3 months on my way to Jackson, just cruising, got to go to New Mexico, which was weird. And, like just kind of bebopped around. It was summertime-ish, fall time. So I was able to sleep in the truck. And I actually recently found a journal from that trip. And I think it was more of a coming to age trip than I realized. But there was intention at the end of that trip to land in Jackson. So that was always at the end of the trip. And I rolled into Jackson, and it was just as wild as you can imagine, being 20 years old. And all of a sudden, I didn't realize too that I had to pay like first month, last month security deposit when I rolled up. So I was like broke, and I didn't have any skis or I didn't have any gear. And it's such a different world. I mean, beacon, shovel, probe, things that I had never dealt with before, and just navigating those. I was 22, so I wasn't really socializing and going to bars. It was kind of a very slow start, also coming back from a knee injury. And that first year, there's a lot of figuring out. I don't know. Every fall comes around, and it's something about the smell or the snow in Jackson. And I'm shot back to that first year, and I'm just like, wow, things have changed a lot. I've come a long way, and it's always nice to take that inventory.
Yeah, well, you start off by waiting tables and skiing your face off, and that sounds like you're not partying your face off the first year, but is that something that you're into too? I mean, do you live the ski bum lifestyle of like booze, weed, mushrooms kind of as part of life?
I definitely did. I feel like I got wrapped up in that world. Also, I was like kind of going for that college experience that I had left, so there was a part of me that was like, this is the best ever. I'm like not in college and I'm skiing all the time. I'm still partying. But as you can imagine, as the athletics have kind of taken the driver's seat, I've been weaning off of the party scene. It's just not conducive to getting up early and pushing my body to the absolute limit. So don't get me wrong. I had a damn good time my first couple of years in Jackson, and my focuses have shifted, and I wouldn't change it at all. It's like those are some of the best times of my life, and it'll be cool if I ever write a book sometime to have those stories written up. I don't know. I don't want to share those with everybody, like I really like those are great stories, but I also think it's really important now that I've like shifted and have been able to like ski even harder and realize that those things are fun, but they take away from what I'm trying to do. So yeah, definitely like to have a good time. COVID has made that shift easy too. There's not that draw of needing to like go out and party or go to the bar and meet friends or even dinner parties. Things have calmed down, and I think it's just kind of perfect timing for me.
Yeah, you can't meet boyfriends at Dave Matthews concerts either. It's a bummer.
I know. It's such a bummer. I don't know where to meet anybody now. No Dave Matthews.
But Jackson, you're learning a ton. You're skiing a shit ton of POW. You're living the life there. And while you're there is when you hear about the Rahlves Bonsai Tour. How do you first hear about it?
That was a funny one because that was my first year in Jackson. And at that point, I was living in this house, and there was like two boys and love triangle confusion, and I just had to get out of there. And my buddy Jackson was like a ski racer from back east. He was a downhiller, and he called me and was like, hey man, like we should go do this thing in California. He explained the whole premise. He's like, I'm in Montana, but my truck's not going to make it. Like if I come through Jackson, can we take your 4Runner and we can all go together? You're going to love it. And he kind of convinced me I wanted to get out of town, and we went. And yeah, it's a wild experience. 4-man start, like a full contact type of deal, just like skier cross, and you're going all over natural terrain with a pair of GS skis, going around gates, trying to get to the finish first. And it's the most scared I've ever been. I don't think I would go back and do that today. No way.
But you ended up on the podium in Alpine Meadows. And
yeah,
I mean, that has to be just such a wild night. Like you take this random road trip and you end up sharing a podium with Rahlves and like your other ski heroes where you think you're not going to be on podiums anymore. Did it bring you all back to like, I like this competition thing?
Totally. Yeah. I think I left ski racing. I was like, I'm never going to set foot in the gym again. I'm never going to put that much pressure on myself again. I'm just going to like have a good time. And then I got into that world. I was like, wait, I like this. Again, the applaud and being like, oh, damn, I'm good at this. And I think the transition from ski racing to big mountain and to like the Darren Rahlves style of skiing is just like, it's so much more fun, at least in my opinion, and everyone's got their thing, but it was just laid back, but I still could like push myself and have that excitement. And there was some cash at the end of the day, which was something I never saw in ski racing. So I was all fired up, and that kind of definitely refueled me on. I had heard about this Freeride World Tour thing and the Subaru Freeride series, which is no longer really a thing. And I was just like, well, like if I can do this, then I can do that. And it was definitely in that moment I shifted. Like I knew when I moved to Jackson, I wanted to be in ski films, but I had no idea what that looked like. So this was kind of like my first into like, well, maybe comps are how I get into those. And yeah, that was a big shift in my life plan there.
Yeah, it's like the soft start of your ski career, and you start believing in yourself again, maybe more than anybody else at that point. And then from there, you go back to Jackson and you start moving food and skiing POW again. And next up on the comps list is Dick's Ditch. And it's like a bank slalom that rivals the Mount Baker bank slalom, but the Mount Baker bank slalom is legendary and better. But do you know the story of why the run is named after Dick?
I don't. Do you?
He was buried in an avalanche for 90 minutes and survived. Have you ever heard
No
anything
way.
like that, 90 minutes?
What a legend. I had no idea.
Yeah. And you spend a lot of time in the backcountry. Have you ever been in a situation where you or somebody else that you're skiing with are in a slide and you have to step into action?
Yeah. I flirted with it when I was in Alaska. I had a friend trigger a pocket and she was able to ski out. It was kind of spooky. And then 2 years ago in the backcountry at Jackson, I was out just a 2-party. So me and one of my good friends, we were shooting photos and she got slid with a camera around her neck. So wasn't really in a place to react. And that was one of the heaviest moments of my life. And was able to get down to her and unbury her and all is gravy and good. But yeah, that stuff happens quick. And I'm so grateful for the education that I had and that I was prepared in that moment because it happens quick and it's amazing how the mind reacts. There was like maybe a split second of freak out and then it's right to the training. And without that training, I don't know what I would have done. So yeah, that stuff is real.
So that's really heavy shit, but you're able to win in that situation based on your training. You get her out alive, which is amazing. And months later from that situation, that friend of yours, do they buy you a gift card? Do they always hug you whenever they see you and say, you saved my life? Is there just some kind of gratitude that you can't get without being in a situation like that?
Well, we have a funny situation. She's a Brit too. So Brits are like kind of emotionally closed off from what I've gathered and are kind of like, oh, it's just a flesh wound. And she never really, we also made bad decisions that day too, you know, like in the big scheme of things, like accidents happen, but there was a few things we could have done better. So I think I had like that weird survival's guilt too, you know, like I was fine and she broke her arm and had to be airlifted and is still like recovering from the mental trauma that is being slid. So there's like, we definitely have had like these very beautiful interactions. We've written letters back and forth, just like when she was back in England, just about the healing process. And she definitely like has said thank you. But I also feel like there's moments where it's also like, this is avoidable and we made a bad decision. So it goes back and forth because it wasn't like I came upon her and just found her and saved her life. Maybe that would be that situation. But I also feel a bit of guilt because we were in this situation that got spicy and she was the one that got taken down.
Yeah. There's definitely two sides to that coin. Back to you and Dix. You take second at this one. I know, it's so fun to say. But the cool thing about all of this is what you're about to do. You make all these moves and they really make no sense at the time, but they pave the way for your future. So you take the money that you win from the Dix event and from Darren's event, and you buy yourself a one-way ticket to New Zealand. And I think going there, the pinnacle of that trip is going to be the North Face Freeride World Tour qualifier. Are you just making that trip because you want to ski all year long? Or is that contest like the reason to go on that trip?
A combination. I feel like I was all fired up on winning after the Bonsai Tour, and it was just like, I didn't want it to stop. And I knew there was that event at the end of the springtime and New Zealand's sweet. And I wanted to go and experience that. And it was perfect because I was able to get a job skiing, like coaching. And so I was able to be on snow a ton. And I was still very much coming back from that injury. So being on snow for a full year was just like huge for my recovery. And part of the reason I left school was to go and travel and explore and do all these things to bring worldly knowledge. And so I just took advantage of kind of the skiing being the ticket to get me there.
Okay. Is it the first freeride type event that you've ever competed in?
Yes, it was. And that's why I think I loved it so much is because I was like, this is easy. Like, I'm not trying to be cocky or anything, but in comparison to ski racing, where it is so intense and everyone isn't that friendly. And it's definitely like dog eat dog. And we're all like vying for this spot on the podium and it's intense. And I was up there and these girls were like, oh, like you've never competed? That's so cool. Like, this is how you visually inspect. And like, this is what this looks like. And they were just so helpful. And then I won. And I was like, oh my God, I love this. People are nice. There's money. I can win. It's like a party too. Like people that compete freeride, like enjoy it too. It's like a full day thing. You're out with your buddies. You have beers at the end. It was just like, why haven't I been doing this for years?
And when you go ahead and win that one, does the North Face, does that relationship start right then? Or is there a lot more proving that needs to go on before people start believing in you and sponsoring you?
So much proving, man. It's like slow grind. I feel like years of proving. That was probably the first place where I was able to have something to stand on post my ski racing career. So when I started reaching out to sponsors, I was able to bring the Darren Rahlves, the first freeride comp I won, and then the second one I was in, I got second. And I basically used my contacts from ski racing and wrote to a couple of brands and was like, hey, here's my ski racing background. And then this is what I've been up to the past couple of years and I'm trying to transition. And I mean, for years, I was paying for gear. I mean, right now I've got all these accolades as far as like Warren Miller and TGR, but I still garden, like I still hostess, I still hustle. It takes a really long time to be fully a professional skier and a professional skier only. So at that point, it was definitely like excitement that I could do this. And like, I heard the stories of like Angel Collinson winning her first ever comp that she was in and being like, cool, I'm like next to the greats in this story that will hopefully be one that is told, and it is being told. And that's why it's so cool to see that come full circle. But no, you have to prove yourself for years, in my experience, before things really start turning on.
So is this around the time that you go back to Jackson and you're a ski instructor and you're a server as well? Like, are you certified through all the PSIA stuff and all that?
Yeah, I did a little bit of that. I felt like it was important. Just coming from my ski racing background, I don't remember learning to ski. So just getting all of the proper vocab and understanding how people teach beginners. I didn't understand how to articulate angulation because it's just something I've always done, and it was kind of helpful, and just you also get paid more. So I did a little PSIA stuff, and then I was lucky enough to like get my foot in the door with a race team. It's funny. It's a little community where these ski instructors that have been doing it forever are double booked, and they're like, hey, you want to take this private client? They're going to be great. You're going to love them. And that's when you really start making money. And I kind of got into this little niche of ski instructing. I'm like, this is sweet. Like, I'm 21, I'm making killer money, and I'm like just skiing for a living. And that's really cool. And I did still want to be an athlete in these films, but at that moment, paying rent was just like, it was cool. I could do that on a pair of skis, and it wasn't the exact version, but it was doing the job at that moment.
Now it's time for me to take another sponsor break, and next up is Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. If you don't know Peter Glenn, well, they started in Vermont over 60 years ago when retail was king, and they've been the brand that has helped build skiing and snowboarding on the East Coast forever. They still have that retail element, but now everyone can shop at Peter Glenn because they also play against the big internet brands too. And guess what? They'll price match the big guys, offer free shipping on orders over $49, and have great deals on the best brands. To find out more, head on over to peterglenn.com. Next up, it's Cole Headwear. And you know what everyone needs this winter? A beanie. And a lot of times you get a beanie and it doesn't have the right fit and you end up looking stupid. That has happened to me way too often in life. Until I found Cole Headwear. I've been wearing their beanies at least 10 years before I started this podcast because I knew when I bought one, it would look right on my head. And my shit always looks fresh because I wear Cole. That goes for hats too, but it's winter, so we're talking beanies. And I'm going to save you 15% off your entire Cole order. When you head on over to coleheadwear.com, go shopping, enter the code POWEL, the number 15, it's all one word, no caps or spaces, and you will get that 15% off. My last sponsor in this sponsor break is my first ever ski sponsor, Elan Skis. They make handcrafted skis in Slovenia's Julian Alps, and they have a serious history, like 75 years of history. Seriously, this is their 75th anniversary of making world-class skis with innovative technology that makes skiing better for everyone. And with Elan, it's all about experience, and they are as authentic as it gets. Whether you're heading out on a backcountry adventure with your bros, on a trip to the local hill with your family, or enjoying après with your friends, the experience is what matters. And with Elan, that experience is always good times. You can find out more about the Ripstick, which I'm currently skiing on and loving, Glen Plake, and everything else Elan over at elanskis.com. Those are my sponsors. Now it's time to jump back into the podcast. You're a professional skier at that point when you're paying your rent by skiing every day. But as far as the lifestyle of being in Jackson, I mean, it's so expensive. First, how far do you live from Jackson proper?
So I'm currently in Wilson, Wyoming, which is at the base of Teton Pass, and it's probably 15 minutes from Jackson. It's closer to the resort than the town itself, and it's a bit sleepier. Jackson actually is like pretty populated and really busy and total tourist destination, as you can imagine. So Wilson is a little bit removed, which is actually a bit more expensive because it's quieter and log cabins and families. But in my opinion, it's worth the extra couple $100 to really have like a sanctuary in the woods and the whole cabin feel instead of being in an apartment that could be anywhere.
What are the rents there? I mean, do you have a cabin in the woods and do you have a place to yourself?
Oh, no. I share it with 3 other girls, and it was like a crazy layout. It's Jack and Jill style, which I had never heard of before, but basically like there's a main living area, and then I walk through my roommate Della's room to get to my room. And it's definitely like all the living situations in Jackson are so quirky, and we're still paying like upwards of $1,000, and that's cheap, like we are okay walking through each other's bedrooms because it's so quote unquote cheap spending that $1,000 a month. And so yeah, it's definitely pricey, and you kind of just, I guess, swallow that expense, and you know that you're in the place you want to be, and you can walk out your door and be in the most gorgeous landscape's the best places to push yourself as a big mountain skier or a mountaineer, whatever you choose to do. So I guess it's that understanding of give a little for that opportunity.
Yeah, and is Jackson one of those towns where it's like 15 dudes for every girl that lives there?
That's what they say. It definitely has that connotation. And I think up until maybe 5-10 years ago, that was the case. But there really is a big shift. It's exploding. And especially with people now working remotely, as you can imagine, if really wealthy people that have been working remotely in San Francisco have the opportunity to come spend $1,000, $1,500 on rent, that's nothing in comparison to the city. And I think it is drawing in more women. And I feel like some of the most badass women I've ever met live in Jackson. So maybe I am also surrounded by more women because I'm a female in the mountains and we tend to stick together. But I would say the ratio is pretty like 50-50 in my kind of close friend group. And maybe that's not the norm.
Well, that's refreshing.
Yeah, totally.
When you think of mountain towns like that, I mean, some people go there with the idea that they're going to spend a couple seasons there and then they're going to go use a degree that they earned. Some people are like, hey, I'm going to be a lifer here. But even the people that seem to be lifers, when you get to be about 60, I don't know if you see as many lifers living in those towns. Can you stay in a mountain town living until you're really old? Or do most of those folks go elsewhere once they get to hit a certain age?
Wow, Wyoming's incredible because there are your classic, like, even in Jackson, ranchers that are just like, I don't know, 70 and are beating you up the boot pack or are still wrangling cattle or just like so badass. And so there are the people that can. I just like personally, I feel like at least at this point in the game, like to be able to afford a property or a house and have a family, it's almost like you have to be a millionaire, if not a billionaire. And so I don't know the longevity there. And it's also so cold. And as I've heard and as I've even experienced, as you get older, the cold is less and less of a treat and more of a hassle. So I don't know. I think depending on your mindset and if you're financially stable enough to make it work, it's definitely a possibility, but it's a younger demographic as far as I've seen.
Okay. And Jackson is famous for a lot of things. The Jackson Hole Air Force, TGR, Galande coiffing, and Corbetts. It's one of those seminal features that stands out at Jackson. And what makes it so special and intense is the mandatory air into it and that it's right next to the lifts. So it's a rock star spot where you can send it when the conditions are ideal. When do you first hear that there's going to be a contest held on it?
That's just such a funny story because I was told that they needed women by a friend of mine, Sophie Schwartz, who is an ex-mogul USDT member. She was really trying to make her mark in skiing in Jackson, and she really wanted it on this competition. And she's like, you should do it too. And I was like, God, that sounds like a nightmare. Like hucking into Corbetts with a bunch of people watching just sounds super stressful. And I got kind of coerced by a couple of people, and my name got brought up. And Jess McMillan, who was running the event, sent me an email and said, you've got a spot if you want it. And it's funny because she had no idea who I was, and it was kind of a gamble on her part. It's a big, scary couloir, and there's some risk involved. But the only reason I wasn't doing it was because I was nervous and scared. And I've never really been the person to like allow that to make a decision. So I was like, all right, well, I'll give it a go. And I had zero expectation of winning. I had never hit anything like that before. And it's funny, that story, I like took my first drop, and I'd actually never skied Corbetts before. I'm not really the type of person. I just don't really enjoy skiing under the lifts or like in front of people. That's not what skiing is for me. It's like a very soulful, like, I don't know. I like dancing in the mountains and jumping off of huge stuff. And I don't necessarily, now that there's cameras, that's like kind of just how it is. But before that, I just like doing it for the right reasons in my head. And it's changed for sure being a profession, but that just sounded crazy. And so I basically jumped in, and the way that floor just drops from underneath you is a wild experience, and it plays with your brain. And I totally, like, they don't even show my first run because it was such a disaster. It was like a cat falling out of a window. I like spread my legs and swam through the air, and just luckily, because I'm good at coming to my feet, I was able to like pull it together and I landed. But I was so stressed, and my buddy Keegan, who is now like a photographer for the North Face and is like a really good friend of mine, talk about ski bum. He was like a snowboard skid through and through, and he had been watching the live stream, and he was running the Gandhi. He worked on the lifts, and I got down. He was like, man, like, that was sick, but like, you gotta pull it together in the air, man. Like maybe a shifty or something. And I was like, yeah, dude, for sure. And I went back up and did it again. I just had Keegan's voice in my head of like, pull it together. And I was able to pop a little bit and like shifty and land. And there's no expectation of winning. That was definitely like an insane moment and something that I'll remember forever. Just that shock factor of being like, you're kidding. And I mean, like, that was a big check that I was able to win. And also there was a big debacle about female versus male pay and a big to do with that whole experience. And I all of a sudden was just like catapulted into the ski world and into male-female equality conversations. And quote unquote, like the next up and comer. And I was like, whoa, 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 this is crazy. Like overnight, because I had been picking away for 3 to 4 years on this career at that point, and just like at a certain point I was like, I don't know how you break in. I don't know how it works. And then boom, I was in it.
Yeah, it's amazing how like winning the contest combined with the social media and the time in the world where contests like that are going to be seen immediately. You became a name overnight in skiing, and sponsors and everything like that come along. But before I even get into that, when you win an event like that, especially in a town like Jackson, I would think what you did gets like the highest level of respect, because everybody's seen Corbetts, everybody's seen people send Corbetts, but it's not like everybody has a runway into Corbetts where people are watching, where you can get as much speed as you possibly can and send it knowing the conditions are going to be good below. That doesn't really happen ever. And when you do that and nail it, the respect level for you, it's an honor automatically just being there. It's instant respect. But everyone, I'm sure, starts calling you queen, because that's what you are. You're the queen of Corbetts. And you end up winning the event the next year, which is amazing too. So does that almost get annoying where everywhere you go, people like, while you definitely appreciate winning and you realize what a big deal it is, like just the novelty of being called queen all the time, does that kind of get old?
Yeah. And I feel like I'm pretty shy, which is funny because people think that I'm quite extroverted, and I think I am, but I hate when people brag about me, in the sense of it just makes me blush and I feel weird and I don't know how to respond. And so there's a lot of that going on. And I think it's such a double-edged sword, because that's what I needed to break into this dream that I had, but it also kind of like changed my personal life. And as small as the fame of being the queen of Corbetts in Jackson is, it's a kind of daunting task for someone who had never even, like, no one gave a shit who I was before that. No one cared. I was a ski instructor and I worked at the Spur. Like, that's just who I was. And then all of a sudden it was like way more than that. And I think, quite frankly, this year I gave over the title. Veronica Paulson earned the title with her massive backflip, but it was almost relieving, to the point where I was like, cool, like I almost wanted to move on from that, because I also feel like as an athlete, my strengths lie in these big burly lines, like double stagers and spines and steep, and I like big drops, and Corbetts is kind of a big drop, but it's not the most ideal landing. And it basically, I had so much pressure on me because of that comp, and I just feel like it wasn't even aligned with what my talents were. Like, I'm not a huckster, I'm not a trick person, and maybe I'll work on that. But it's just funny because I found my fame or my way through something that isn't even my real talent. And so I wanted to get away from that. And that's what filming with TGR allowed me to do, was to create a segment that really did showcase what I love about skiing and what I like to do. And it almost feels freeing to be able to step away from like all I've talked about for the past 3 years is Corbetts. And I understand why, I get it, and I'm happy to, but it feels cool to also like be like kind of transitioning into more of a creative film style of skiing. And comps are hard, like they're stressful and nerve-wracking and all of these things. And it just feels kind of cool to be feeling like I'm shifting into kind of the real version of the skier that when I moved to Jackson, I wanted to be.
Awesome. So that first year, you're an overnight success, even though you've been working at it for a long time. And I would think the sponsors come a-calling at that point. I mean, who ends up coming on to sponsor you after the Queen of Corbetts?
That's when North Face kind of came into focus. I was on them though. I like wanted to be on North Face for a very long time, and I just kept, that's the thing, you got to cold call, you got to keep writing emails, you got to be the squeaky wheel, which is also so foreign to me, but it takes a really long time to prove yourself, and you have to like be on it. And so North Face was a big success after that. It was cool to be like, it's such a known event too, to be like, hey, like I'm 2-time Queen of Corbetts, like that resonates with people, they understand, it's easy to digest. And so having that on my resume was huge. So North Face was a big one. And then I transitioned into Oakley and kind of have been getting myself situated ever since. I've been with Blizzard Technica from the beginning, and I really like that relationship. So I say North Face was a big one. I got on to the athlete team at Jackson Hole Mountain Resort, which is a great group of athletes to be a part of, and it saves you the crazy season pass price, and that's always a bonus. But I think it was more just like getting involved in these powder magazines, like calling me and wanting to write articles, and that was like so insane. Just those were childhood dreams. So it definitely was the slow roll to just like overnight, like, yeah, things just started clicking.
Yeah, it's like you go from like a ski racer in 2013 to a dirtbag skier in 2015 to a ski instructor to a full-on pro skier dude or chick. And in this new realm of skiing, like that's new to you, in 2018, you're on top of the world, and you're still not able to quit work though. You still have to work to pay the bills?
Yeah, it's pretty wild how that works. I think it's good just for people to know that when you're in a ski film, you don't get paid by the production company. Your sponsors kind of align and help support that film by being partners with the brand. And so this year would actually have been the first year that I was able to kind of be a full athlete all 4 seasons. I was heading down to Australia to go and do the Warren Miller premiere down there prior to COVID shutting all that down, and it never happened. But I was going to go. I had a bunch of trips lined up in Argentina and South America and all these places. And so that's when it starts to really, when you can be productive year round is when you can really kind of fill that athlete title. But it's a crazy world. It's like the ski industry. It's a very expensive world, as we've discussed, but there isn't a ton of money flowing around like there is in those like Major League Baseball or basketball or any of those mainstream sports, because you can't fill stadiums. And that's like the biggest difference is when you go to a football game, you pay your ticket price, you grab soda, your merch, and you get stoked and you watch these athletes. But we don't have that in skiing. So it's just kind of a tricky world to navigate. And I've actually started reaching out to sponsors outside of the ski industry because I've realized that, especially with COVID, it's just they're tapped. And if you really want to make it, you got to get creative. You got to be a business person, and you have to be way more than a skier. You have to be a writer, and you have to be a photographer, and you have to be a model, and you have to be all these things that it took a while for me to wrap my head around. But I've realized that the dream to be an athlete and to not have to be behind a desk is worth kind of these other hats that I've started to wear.
Well, it sounds like based on the obsession you had as a child to get yourself a scholarship, combined with the knowledge that you have now of what it takes to become a paid pro skier, it's just a matter of time. We have to get through COVID, I guess, to get brand new sponsors. But you're already looking outside of the industry, and it sounds like you're going to be able to pitch all this content that they're not going to be able to get anywhere else, and you're very smart about it. So I think that's going to work out for you, which is pretty awesome. But the next thing that works out for you is Jess McMillan gets you into the contest. She doesn't know who you are. She gives you a slot into the Queens of Corbett's contest, and then a year or two later, after you win that contest a couple times, it's her turn to go film again for Warren Miller, but she decides to give you her seat at the Warren Miller table to represent Jackson Hole, and I would think that's just another huge honor for you right there. One, taking the spot of Jess, and two, representing Jackson Hole, which is just a legendary spot in these Warren Miller movies.
Yeah, that was such a cool conversation, and I think I've tried to really tell that story because I feel like in the ski industry, especially as far as women go, it's a very small group that makes it, and therefore it's created a very competitive nature among women in the ski industry, and luckily that's changing, and I think that's beautiful. But Jess, what an incredible thing for her to do. Like, she's worked her whole life to be in the place that she's in, and she was able to be like, hey, like, I've had my time, I'm transitioning, you're coming up, you're deserving of this. And the coolest part was prior to filming, her and I went out like 2 or 3 weeks in a row before, because I had never really been in front of a camera. So she also took it upon herself to train me in those ways of like, there's a lot that goes into cinematography that people don't realize, as far as like how you have to be like very on with your spot, because the camera's set up and you have to be in their frame, and you have to be like skiing fluidly. They don't like cut these things down or edit them as much as you would think. And so you just have to be on your game. And she was so cool about being like, hey, like, this is going to happen. And she's filmed with the crew that I was filming with. So she's like, Tom Day is a legend. He's amazing, but like, don't mess it up. Or like, she just gave me a bunch of tips that were incredibly helpful. And I'm so grateful for her guidance, and also just, yeah, like passing the torch. I'll never forget that. And hopefully someday I'll have the same opportunity.
Yeah. And you filmed with TGR, you filmed with Warren Miller. They are totally different productions, I would think. And what's the biggest difference between going out with a Warren Miller crew and going out with the TGR crew?
They are very different production companies. I feel like Warren Miller, I was hungry and I wanted to prove myself as a skier. So I was pretty adamant about not changing the narrative in any stretch, but being like, hey, these are big lines, let's go see these. And we were able to put together in Warren Miller's world a very aggressive, badass segment that Forrest, me, and Cam were able to put together. And it was like not your classic smiley family high five. It was like, we're here to shred and that's what we're going to do. And so the difference, I guess, was that when I rolled up with TGR, it was expected that I would be pushing myself every day, and it would be expected that I was going huge. And they're just known for like having the rowdiest athletes in the ski industry. And I think that was really cool because that's what I want to do. I want to push the sport. I want to do things that haven't been done. And so it was more conducive to what I was trying to do, but also in different ways. Like, it was such a professional world with Warren Miller. They've got their stuff dialed. They're very corporate. They're very like by the book. And that organization I kind of took for granted. I didn't realize that that was not across the board. And then you come into filming with TGR and it's a bit more, I don't know, rowdy and less organized. And
I would think with Warren Miller, you're pampered. Like, everything is 5-star. You go to places that only your boarding school friends would go to all the time because they could afford it. But that's what you do at Warren Miller. With TGR, you're at the Peruvian or wherever you can go that's cheap, and you're going to go shred harder than you've ever skied in your life.
Yeah, that's a pretty accurate description. Like, yeah, Warren Miller is polished and TGR is like aggro, get after it, boys club.
And with Warren Miller, when you do that whole movie tour, because I'm sure that's another experience where you probably feel famous for the first time, where you're in front of these huge crowds, you're signing posters while you sign at TGR shows too. Just the Warren Miller experience is so many more people. I mean, did you feel like a rock star then?
Oh yeah, that was like the coolest couple months of my life, because it was also like Jackson Hole Mountain Resort was a sponsor, so therefore they were paying for my travel, and I was able to do a bunch of the West Coast tours, which was cool because that's where all my athlete friends are. But there aren't many East Coast big mountain skiers, so I was the one that was shuttled back east, and I had like a quote unquote manager who was just a buddy from the resort, John Bowers, who I just really enjoy the company of. So it was him and I just like rallying this like Kia sedan around the East Coast, but we would stay in like these penthouse suites, and we would like, show up early, and I don't know, definitely felt like a rock star, signing posters, people getting excited and being recognized. And I don't think I realized how much I really enjoyed that until went into tour season this year with COVID and being like kind of let down by not getting that bit. And I tried to really wrestle with that of like, am I too involved in the ego? Like, is that why I'm doing this? And it's not, but it's definitely like a cool way to celebrate your hard work and come together and get people hyped.
Yeah, this year would have been the big tour for Make Believe that everybody can get on iTunes right now. It's the movie from TGR, which you are in. Your highlight of that was it The Cave?
The cave area, yeah, that was.
It was insane. People can see that online. I think that's online for free, but you can buy the whole movie over at iTunes. And I think I had a few more questions, but I'm kind of just skipping all over them because I have my favorite part of the show, which is called Inappropriate Questions. And what I do is I get somebody that you know to ask you 3 questions, and they can be anything. And this week, I got one of your roommates, TGR digital marketing maven, Taylor Fry, to ask you 3 questions. And I hope they make you very nervous and uncomfortable. And are you ready for question number 1?
Hit me.
Kate, what happened on your high school ski trip?
That's what we talked about briefly, was my trip to France. There's a bunch of stuff we did.
We want the part that made you say, ooh.
Ooh. Yeah, we got our hands on a pill that was for Tourette's. It was a horse tranquilizer, and we weren't sure what that was going to do. And being dumb high schoolers, we took one, and then we're drinking, and we basically snuck out and then realized that our legs stopped working because of this pill that we had taken, and we had to like army crawl ourselves back to the hotel. And as you can imagine, we got busted pretty hard and didn't look good at all. And we all got a bunch of trouble. And that's basically when I was ripped into the headmaster's house and put on the straight and narrow.
Yeah, that's a lot worse than you made it sound before. Before, it just sounded like you were out at 16 years old and 16-year-olds could drink. So you were like, oh, I was going to have some drinks. But you took a horse tranquilizer, which you didn't know what it was going to do to you. Then you started drinking. It's like the after-school special, all the things you weren't supposed to do, but you lived to tell the tale and your legs work again. Crazy story. We're going to go into question number 2.
What's the story behind your tattoo?
Oh, she's really getting me, isn't she?
Sorry.
That's okay.
So what's the story behind the tattoo?
So I spoke briefly about that trip where I was traveling all over the place on my way to Jackson, and I met that boy, Nick, at that Dave Matthews concert we discussed, and he basically was like, hey, I've got tickets to Old Crow Medicine show in Bend. You should come up and hang out. And I was like a in-love 20-year-old, and I was like, yeah, that sounds great. And we ended up going and hanging out, and I had never been to a strip club before. And we ended up going to a strip club, and as we just discussed in that first story, I like pushing the boundaries. I think it's really fun across the board, no matter what, to kind of accelerate things past where they maybe need to go. And we were at the strip club and we were partying pretty hard, and I was with a bunch of Nick's friends, and it was a couple of girls, and they're like, we're going to go to Hawaii. Like, do you want to come? And I was like, yeah, that sounds awesome. When are you going? And they're like, Thursday. And it was Tuesday. And I bought a ticket in the strip club, a one-way ticket to Hawaii. Ended up waking up, not remembering that choice I had made, and had a confirmation email that I was leaving in like whatever couple days to go to Hawaii, and hop on the plane and ended up going. And we ended up partying super hard the first day I was there, and they all wanted to go get tattoos. So we went to this tattoo parlor, and I had been drinking, and I didn't know what I wanted. I had never really thought about a tattoo before. And so I wrote to my mom, and I was like, hey, like, what's one word that describes me? And she said alive. And I was like, do you mind like writing that down? Like maybe in an artistic way. And she's like, babe, like I'm in the tub. Like, does this need to happen right now? I'm like, yeah, this needs to happen right now. And so she like scribbled out alive, and I sent it to the tattoo artist, and he printed it out and put it directly, her handwriting, on my wrist. And I was like, man, I don't know. Should I do this? And he goes, you know what I have to say? Huck it, chuck it, throw the football, which made no sense. But for whatever reason, I was like convinced. I was like, yeah, let's do it. This will be sweet. Like, and so that's my tattoo story.
Well, I'm sure you're stoked that you have a live on your wrist,
Mm-hmm.
at least in your mom's writing.
Yeah, it was something that I was like, what is wrong with you? And now I've come to really appreciate it. I've always got her with me, and it's a good reminder that you gotta like be in the moment or whatever cheesy statement comes along with that. But it's nice to have. I'm looking at it right now, and it's also a good reminder to just huck it, chuck it, throw the football.
I'd be more like I got screwed, lewd, and tattooed, but either way, huck it, chuck it, throw the football. That works as
Exactly.
well. Let's go for your final inappropriate question.
Any good paragliding stories you got?
So I was going to ask you about paragliding because I had read something about paragliding in you and you maybe not landing it or something like that. But
Oh, yeah.
she is asking, are there any good paragliding stories? So I didn't ask during the podcast. So this question could come out from Taylor.
I've got a good one. It's pretty recent. So I took my wing back to New Hampshire when I went home to see my family in the summertime. And as you can imagine, there's far more trees in New Hampshire than out in Wyoming. And I just didn't really equate for a bunch of things. So one, we're on this really sketchy low angle launch. So it's like 800 feet, which is more of a base jump than a like it just, everything was kind of wrong. And I'm flying with this guy who's a legend, but he doesn't have any certifications. He learned with my dad back in the 90s, and he's pretty loose in his nature. And he basically like brings his kite overhead and falls off the cliff and is just like, that was so sketchy, like don't do what I do. And he just gets launches by this like thermal. And so therefore I don't have a flight, like I don't know, he didn't give me the rundown of where to land. So I like take off and all of a sudden I'm like, I don't even know where to land. But I remember that he said that there was a gazebo and I needed to land by the gazebo. So I'm looking and there's two gazebos. I'm like, fuck, there's two of them. Like, which one? And I'm like, okay, I'm going to eliminate that one. That one looks dangerous. All right, this is the one. And then I'm like, I cannot land there. It was like this tiny little section where I need to land. And I'm new. Like, I'm like 3-4 months into paragliding. Like, I don't have tricks to like just land it like that. I need some space. And so I'm like, you know what? Fuck that. I'm not going to do that. And we're at a golf course. And so I'm seeing that there's a fairway. And I'm like, I know I can lose enough elevation in this fairway. But as I'm starting to not lose elevation, I'm realizing that I'm going to run out of runway. Like, because I'm lower elevation, I'm used to flying in Jackson at like 10,000 feet. And so the air is thinner and I'm able to fall out of the sky faster, basically. And I'm in North Conway and it's whatever, 350 feet above sea level. And I'm just hanging on to altitude, which in all scenarios is cool for flying. In this scenario, it wasn't cool. And I'm just looking at the ground, and all you can do in paragliding is look where you want to go at a certain point, because I'm stuck what I would consider like a couloir of trees, and it's so tight that my wing is like brushing on the trees on either side, and the only way to lose elevation in that rig is to kind of turn, but I didn't have any space to turn. So I'm just trying to fly as inefficiently as possible. I'm flapping, I'm using my brakes, and I'm just not losing elevation. And so I'm headed towards this house, like this lady's house, and I'm just looking at this like yard in front of it, trying to just focus on the yard, not the house, in hopes that I'll help. And all of a sudden I see this woman, this older woman, who's doing her dishes, and she's looking out the window at me, like doing her dishes. And as I get closer, she's starting to like not do her dishes, and we're making eye contact. And at this point I've gotten very good at falling, and I've gotten good at bracing for impact. And so I'm breathing and I'm calming myself down. I'm trying to get loose, and I'm just coming at her, and her eyes are just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then all of a sudden I just stop, and I realize that I've gotten caught in this tree. And it's a dead tree, so my glider's stuck in this tree, and I'm looking at her enough to like get like 1 second maybe of eye contact, and then the tree just breaks, and I just like poof, like 30 feet out of the air onto my ass, and I just like am in shock, but I'm stoked. I do a quick like body check, everything's intact. I'm like, cool. And I bundle up my wing, and I look at her, and I give her a thumbs up, and her eyes are just huge. And I just like, I'm not supposed to be landing at this golf course, so I'm like, get out of there. And I'm running down the fairway, and this old guy and his golf cart's like, I think you're fucking out of your mind, but that was sick. Like, where are you going? You need a ride? And I was like, yeah, man, that'd be great. And so we like bundle up the wing into the golf cart, and he drops me off at the landing zone I was supposed to be at. And I didn't want Scott to know that I had crashed, because I want him to think I'm cool, because he's cool. And so like, I just like pretended that nothing happened. And Scott came in and did this like sick spiral that I'm not allowed to do yet in my certification of paragliding. He's like, how's your flight? I'm like, it was sweet. We didn't even talk about it. And yeah, it was definitely the closest call I've had. And I hope that woman didn't have a heart attack, because I would feel bad.
That's an amazing story. And just that story that woman has to tell to other people that are never going to believe her. They're going to be like, come to my house and look at the tree. It's broken. I swear. This paraglider came right at the house. She was about to enter my window, and then she was stopped, slingshotted backwards, and then thrown to the ground. And then she got up and left. And everybody's like, no, that didn't happen.
Yeah, exactly. Like, dementia's kicking in.
Yeah, that is amazing. Well, I want to thank you for your time. It's been an amazing podcast. I asked the guys at TGR, Max especially, I was like, Max, you name the next athlete that you want me to put on from TGR and I'm going to do it. And he's like, I'm going to talk to people in the office and I'm going to see who we want collectively interviewed. And he came back really quickly, was like, everybody wants you to interview Caite. And you know what? It was a fucking great interview and your life story is really interesting. And it's cool to see someone as driven as you are, who coming from like a single mom's family, you weren't supposed to be a pro skier, even though you did grow up right at a ski resort and didn't ski when you were little. But you were able to make that all happen, and it's because of the tenacity that you have to make things work and to hear about you talking about what you need to do to move forward in sponsorship. It's like you understand what needs to happen, and you're not afraid to make the work happen. So it'll be cool to see how your career evolves, and I wish you the best of luck, and thank you.
Cool. Well, I appreciate the time. It was fun to chat with you, and yeah, good work getting those stories out of me.
So that was time with Caite Zeliff, and what a story from a motivated woman. And when I say motivated, Caite seemed to be the best of both worlds, like a go-getter who likes to party. She's the perfect fit for the TGR crew, and I have a feeling we'll be hearing a lot more from Caite in the years to come. That's the podcast for this week. At this point, I want to say happy birthday to me. I'm 47 on New Year's Eve, or I'm 46 or 48. I'm not even sure, and it doesn't even matter at this point. I also want to wish each and every one of you a happy new year and a way better 2021. The next episode I have kicks off an amazing season 5 that I have lined up. More legends and a curated variety of interviews that you will only find on this show. And if you like this show, please review it. Here's what you need to do if you have an iPhone. First, hit the podcast icon. Second, search for the Powell Movement. Third, tap my logo. Fourth, scroll down to where you see the stars. Fifth, hit 5 stars. Sixth, if you'd like, you can put in a review, and that would make me feel really good. Maybe I'll read it online one of these weeks. I should be reading reviews every week, and maybe I'll start doing that next week. Who knows? But now I'm starting to babble, and instead of babbling, I just want to thank you for listening and thank my amazing sponsors who make this thing happen. They are Cole Headwear, Stanley, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, Elon Skis, Glade Optics, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Have a great week, everyone.